Good morning. I believe in fathers. I consider myself fortunate to have 3 significant father figures in my life. My biological father and mother were wed while I was gestating. I consider myself one of the lucky children conceived outside of wedlock in 1964. My parents were allowed to marry. Expected might have been a more accurate term. At that time, it wasn't unusual for young people in crisis pregnancies to be denied the option of marriage. And since middle-class America was horrified at the idea of single-parent families, adoption was the en vogue solution. For better or worse, I could easily have been relinquished to another family. The pregnancy was only the first crisis. I was not seated in the birth canal. My mother and I struggled for 16 hours to get me out neck first before the obstetrician moved my head such that I shot right out. My mom sustained permanent hip damage. My face is mostly recovered from the mushing. The postpartum depression was crushing. My mother's dream of becoming a nurse was destroyed by the old proverb, "You made your bed," that her mother would laud over her. They were young and ignorant. And to my retrospective horror, my mother was pregnant again within weeks. Perhaps I would have been better off in a new family versus having a depressed, vomiting mom struggling with a giant, demanding infant. Who knows? What we do know is that the truly crushing blow came when my Irish twin Darren died as an infant before I even reached age 2. My poor mother lost it. My dad reacted by putting me in the cab of his truck while he went about his business repairing logging equipment throughout the Pacific Northwest. He instilled his values and hopes in me, the son he no longer had. We remained extremely close until the divorce, when he took on a new family. At the time, I was jealous and unhappy. But in retrospect, I can see he was trying to make up for the mistakes he'd made in the first family. And when that second marriage failed, he sought and won custody of the children, even one that wasn't biologically his. Dads, starting with my own, often show up when the chips are down. I wasn't exactly hurting for a father figure post-divorce. My mother married a terrific guy, so different from my biological father. He was a mathematician, an astronomer, the director of the Kendall Planetarium at OMSI, and a huge influence on me personally. Gary helped me to appreciate life through a science-based view and the far-out fantasy worlds of science fiction where alternate social constructs could be explored safely. I took Gary's name in high school. I was Anne Michelle Sage, also known as Shelley Stasiak, on my first bank account. I'm especially fortunate that my 2 dads both accepted the broader extended family. They weren't just polite at weddings. They actually joined me and my various full-step half-siblings at gatherings like campouts. Hard for many to imagine, I suppose, but the modeled behavior became an expected norm for subsequent generations. My mom's third husband is a dear friend, less of an influencer. He's more of a trusted advisor. I always want his pragmatic feedback on any major decision I'm facing. By far, the most purchased wedding photo is of my mom and her 3 husbands, which should be appearing on the screen here momentarily. There they are, my 3 dads. I've seen men step up so often, in so many ways. My father is not the only man in my family to fight for and win custody of their non-biological children. I have 2 brother-in-laws who have done the same. I've known countless men who have served nobly, to the best of their capacity, in the ambiguous role of step-parent. Another way I've seen men step up is by relinquishing their rights to parent. Sadly, many parts of our culture have made sport of degrading men's contributions to child rearing. This, usually coupled with a woman who insists she'd be better off without him, all too often lead to men giving up, leaving families even when they don't want to, because it seems that's the best thing for the children. And I know they don't want to. With over 25 years in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous and other 12-step programs, I hear men sharing their worst fears and greatest sorrows, just like the women. Estrangement from, loss of, failure to provide and care for children top the list every single time. I've also enjoyed insight into another astonishing thing that men do as parents from a very small part of our population: adoptees. Over and over, we learn that the sought and found biological father is accepting and open to engaging children who show up on their doorstep, often a child they never even knew they had. Had I been one of those searching children, I know my dad would have been one such man. And today is a very auspicious day for me. It's Father's Day. It's also my biological father's birthday. And I wanted to share something that I'm going to be giving to him later. I had this piece commissioned by an artist named Claudia Lima in Eureka, California. It's of a Laterno log stacker, and the artist put a small girl with long brown hair in it to represent me, and probably 1 or 2 of my younger sisters.
Our reading today is from Evin, Carvill, Ziemer, who writes, "I believe in fathering. I believe in the radical idea that men have full human capacity to nurture. Hair bows and baseballs, tools and tiaras, cooking and creativity, camping and dancing, snuggles and shrieks of delight. Too many fathers don't believe in their own fathering. Too many are scarred by their own fathers to hear their hearts say otherwise. Too many men have... Too many men have known fathers who knew only yelling and hitting. Too many have known fathers who, faced with a quivering lip and tears, could only say, 'Man up!' Too many have known fathers who lost sight of their sacred role of protector and became tormentor. But I believe in fathering. When a human being gestates and gives birth, her brain changes permanently. A father's brain changes permanently too, changes as he rocks his baby to sleep, delights in baby games, and soothes bumps and bruises. A father earns his new neurobiology. In a world where too many mothers hand their co-parent directions more specific than those given to the babysitter, where a father out with his kids is asked, "Are you babysitting?" and "Where's mom?" Where fathers are the punchline. I believe in fathering. I believe in the radical idea that men have the full human capacity to nurture, whether their children come through birth, adoption, or fostering, through scouts, sports, Sunday school, or youth group. I've known too many gay dads, too many single fathers, too many men raising children others couldn't to believe otherwise. I believe we all, especially our children, deserve to know that the human capacity to nurture belongs to every one of us. I believe in fathering. Between the ages of about 2 and 10, I had a pretty typical 1970s upbringing. My mom stayed home with my sister and I, and my dad went to work. And for a good chunk of that time, he had Tuesday afternoons off. And both on Tuesdays at 1 o'clock and at about 5:30 on the other days, my sister Carrie and I would hear him at the door and practically explode with joy. "Daddy's home!" we'd yell and run directly into his arms. It was only much later that I wondered if that hurt my mom's feelings. Probably a little bit. Dad had that great combination. He was both a really good, involved dad, and he wasn't all there all day, so he still had that novelty factor. By the time my mom went to work when I was probably 12, we no longer went running into a parent's arms when they came home from work. But my dad remained a really involved and, honestly, to me, favored parent. And when I had kids with my then wife, Jill, we decided to use known sperm donors. So our kids would have the option of knowing something about that side of their genetic history. We signed legal contracts promising no rights or responsibilities and photographs once a year. And I am so grateful to say that we got so much more than that. Alan is my oldest daughter Mika's donor dad. He was a friend of a friend, a smart, kind, funny guy who I met for the first time when he did a slideshow of his trip to the Galapagos Islands. I've never seen so many pictures of blue-footed boobies in my life. He had a bachelor's degree in music performance, a master's in natural resource policy, and a law degree, and he didn't answer us right away because he really wanted to think about it. And 4 months later, in a holiday card, he said yes. Alan has many, many interesting things going on in his life. When we called to tell him it worked and we were pregnant, he told us that he was beginning a PhD program in biology, which eventually led to a focus on penguin vocalization, research in Argentina, and a specialty in endangered bird species. He taught at Fordham University in the Bronx and has consulted all over the world about things like, why are the ibises at the Bronx Zoo not mating? The answer, they had to play them songs of ibises in the wild mating, and they figured out what to do. But most importantly for us was that he was absolutely in love with and fiercely devoted to Mika. For all but about 7 years of her life before she started college, we lived on opposite coasts, but he would see her every 3 months. He'd fly out to visit or fly her out for a visit. When he was in New Zealand for 9 months, he flew her to New Zealand so he could see her. She was enfolded into his extended family and went on summer lake holidays with them in Michigan. A key reason for her choice of Mount Holyoke College in Massachusetts was the fact that he was only an hour and a half away, and she was enfolded into the Auntie Brigade, Alan and his lesbian friends who lived in the area. We were really clear that he didn't get the title of dad by default or biology. He's called Mika several things over the course of her life, from the very early title of Pod, progeny of donation. But at some point, she just became his daughter. He always acted like an uncle, thrilled to be related to her, so proud of her, but he didn't try and tell us how to parent because we were the parents. Since we divorced when Mika was about 10, Jill and I have each had other important people in our lives who have been step-parents to Mika. But if you ask Mika who her parents are, she says Mom and Jema and Alan. We tried for about 2.5 years to have another kid with Alan, but we weren't able to, and then he left for Argentina for 6 months, and I had to tell you, Providence to Seattle was hard enough. Providence to Argentina was not happening. And I mentioned to a friend that we were looking for a new sperm donor, and she said, I know a man who wants to be a sperm donor for lesbians. That seemed fairly random to me. But Tripp had signed up to be a sperm donor when he was attending Yale for a graduate degree, and they'd taken him until the very end when he went in and told them that he was gay. And they said, nope, we're not taking you. Tripp is old school Virginia with a master's in art history from Yale, and he's a professor at Wheaton College in Massachusetts. He worked with a friend in our lesbian moms group in Rhode Island, which is how we met him. Our most important criteria was that he be a really good human being. And so when I asked my friend, but is he a nice guy? She said, Marcia, he donated a kidney to his mother. Okay. Tripp joked that he didn't know what to do with babies, but that when said child turned 21, he'd have them bartend at his parties. But when Marcella was born on September 11th, 2001, he came over with a 4-foot-tall sock monkey. It was quite a day in our house when Mika became taller than the sock monkey, or when Marcella became taller than the sock monkey. And he wound up taking care of her each week when I took Mika to dance class and then out for breakfast. He would just rock with this tiny little human on his chest and read Moby Dick. He wound up, we moved when she was just 4 months old, see her birthday. It hadn't been what we'd planned at all. And I often wondered what their relationship would have been like had we stayed nearby. Unlike Alan, Tripp only came to visit a few times, but we stayed in touch with phone calls and occasional visits that either Jill or I would take Marcella on. But when Mika went to college out there, Tripp and Marcella started spending more time together. When Marcella decided to move someplace less expensive so she could have her own place, we were delighted when she chose Providence, near Tripp and his husband, Ed. Tripp also donated sperm to another friend, Shannon, and so Marcella has 2 half-siblings, Bevan and Murphy, and Shannon has been very generous about including Marcella as extended family as well. While Mika sees her family as a fairly small, tight unit, Marcella jokes about her family bush. Mika sees herself as having 3 parents, and Marcella sees herself as having 8. She includes Alan and Alan's ex-husband, Dan, in her parental group. And we've joked that maybe when she gets married, she'll travel down the aisle in a paladin chair with all of her parents carrying her. One of my very favorite things about being part of a queer family is that we get to define family for ourselves. Everyone gets to do that, but I think we sort of are forced to in different ways. I feel super lucky that my kids got to have people that they describe as their donor dads to others. Neither of my kids call their donor dad. They call them by their names. But as Marcella once said, people don't know what a donor is. Once someone asked me if I'd had cancer because they assumed he donated bone marrow. My kids describe their families in different ways, and they get to do that. And I am really clear that families are what we make of them, and that the more love, the better. I know kids don't need one mom and one dad in order to build and make a loving family. There are lots of ways to make a family, and a combination of parents who love you and are invested in caring for you works and is wonderful. And whatever the genders or non-genders of your parents, these recommendations are good for everyone. People parent in a lot of different ways. And I will also say that one of the things that I really love about modern parenting is how much more involved dads are in fathering. I feel like my dad, who ironed the pleats into my cheerleading skirt in 1983 and always came to my school events, was a little ahead of his time. Now, while moms still tend to do more of the housework and the emotional labor of running a household, we do see a lot more dads nurturing their kids, and I think that's a win for everyone. Dr. Rob Palkovitz writes for Fatherly that good dads follow the ABCs, which he describes as effective climate. Does my dad have my back? Is he there for me? If I called him, would he be there? Now again, I don't think these things have to break down on gender lines, and certainly some dads step up in ways that some moms don't. You can see Shelley's stories for examples of those. But as a stereotype that has some basis in fact, it is more often that fathers aren't there than mothers. And Palkovitz writes that it's really important, not only for kids, but for dads' mental health as well, that dads are there for their children. Palkovitz writes that involved fatherhood improves a man's cognitive skills, health, and capacity for empathy. It builds his confidence and self-esteem while enhancing emotional regulation and expression. Involved fathers often say that they've learned to control their anger better or not express negative emotions such as fear quite as easily. And they've recognized the need to express tender emotions, which men stereotypically are said to find challenging. The B in Palkovitz's ABCs stands for behavior. What are you doing? Are you not just creating a climate where your kid feels like you're there for them, but are you actually there, showing up and playing with your kids or feeding them or taking them places? Palkovitz writes, a close father-child relationship gives fathers opportunities to re-experience childhood, reintegrate memories, and make sense of relationships with their own parents. When they get down on the ground with kids, it's not just great parenting. They're engaging in deep psychological involvement or development for themselves. C stands for connection. Actually tuning into what your kids need in this moment because of who they are. Are you disciplining because you think that's what's required of you? Or are you really seeing your kid and what they need? This is that moment of parenting the kids you have that I spoke about a month ago. Lee Weiler writes in nextgenmen.ca that the stereotype of good fathers from 50 years ago was father as provider, disciplinarian, and rock. You provided for your family by working, often as the only parent working. Your wife raised the kids, but let you do the disciplining. Just wait until your father gets home. And it was good to be seen as calm, unflappable, and even emotionally distant. Now we expect something very different from fathers. It's hard for families to survive on one income, and we want dads to pick up a lot more of the actual interacting with kids, which is, while exhausting, also a lot more emotionally rewarding. Not only is fathering different, but parenting is much different than it was 50 years ago. Most families need now to have two wage earners, but at the same time, childcare is incredibly expensive, so especially if you have more than one kid or if you have an infant, it can be cheaper for someone to stay home. Other families juggle things by working different shifts or one parent working part-time. COVID really did a number on parents. When your kids are home all the time and there is no school and there are no childcare options, somebody has to be there. The most interesting fact, and the one that I will leave you with today, is that research shows that parenting differently than the leave it to beaver stereotypes is actually the best antidote for what we call toxic masculinity, and not just for the kids. Men as involved, nurturing, trustworthy parents not just people who provide and then swoop in for discipline and punishment. Heal toxic masculinity, not just for their kids, but for themselves as well. Putting your daughters on a pedestal and yelling at your sons to suck it up and be a man, don't cry or I'll give you something to cry about, that hurts kids. Let your kids have their feelings. Teach them how to manage them, not stuff them. And good things will happen all around, my friends. May it be so. Blessed be, and amen.